Now, we know that narcissistic people operate as vampires, and instead of blood, they suck out empathy, right? And as a result, they are naturally drawn to empathic people because they can suck them dry, and the empathic person will rarely step away. But let's talk about this vulnerability that some people have that can really make it risky for them, that they're going to fall into a narcissistic relationship. And what I'm about to tell you, you're going to say, lady, everyone feels this way. Not as much as you might think. The vulnerability I'm talking about is people for whom it's very important and they very much want to be wanted. And you're like, Dr. Ramani, you're crazy. Everybody wants to be wanted. To a point. To a point. Where this becomes a vulnerability is when that desire, that want to be wanted, is such a powerful draw that it runs the risk of blinding a person to the other things that are happening early in a relationship. So let me tell you what I mean by this. The sense of almost having too much of a desire or a want to be wanted, a desire to be desired, as it were, can be very powerful for people who may not have always gotten consistent regard as kids, or alternatively, kids who almost got too much regard as kids. But what's more common is people who didn't get that consistently as a kid. So they would soak up those moments when they were the focus of attention, of wanting to be wanted, of wanting to be seen, those singular moments. Maybe it was their birthday. Maybe it was when they maybe sang in a school play. Maybe it was when they were doing something that their parents were so proud of. They hold on to those moments as though they're so precious, and they internalize them. And as adults, they want to feel that magic, that moment when they felt so wanted. That can drive into adulthood almost too much of a need, too much of a want to be wanted or desired. So when it finally comes to a person, it makes it harder for them to notice red flags. Desire is an incredibly powerful thing. And when we know we're desired, when somebody's eyes on us make us feel desired, or somebody's attention on us make us feel desired, it is incredibly, incredibly seductive. And I don't just mean in an intimate relationship. I also mean potentially in a professional relationship. When somebody thinks you're so amazing and they're like, oh my gosh, you're the smartest person I've ever met, or you're the most creative person I've ever met, or this is the coolest work I've ever seen, we're often like, wow, this is amazing. It's like being reborn. It's going back to that childhood wound of so desperately wanting to be seen. Sometimes it can even happen in other relationships, like friendships. Somebody's like, wow, you're so amazing. You know how to do X or Y better than anyone. I've never met anyone like you. And they're so dazzled by you. We want to dazzle people. It can be really, really overwhelming. But what gets tricky, and what I've seen happen time and time again, that absolutely seductive draw to wanting to be desired, to wanting to be wanted, to wanting to almost be pedestalized, as I put it, like sort of put up on a pedestal, can really, really give us a sort of interesting form of psychological tunnel vision. When we feel so overwhelmingly wanted or desired by someone, it is in some ways like a fantasy. It's an ancient fantasy, the child who desperately wanted to be seen, but it's also an adult fantasy. Who doesn't want that moment of someone looking at them and feeling like the other person believes they just hung the moon, or they're just the most beautiful thing they've ever seen? We want those moments. And the fact of the matter is, it's very healthy. There's nothing more beautiful than being in love with someone and they look at you and they don't see anyone else. It's actually really quite beautiful when you work with someone and you're so vibing with each other that it's almost like the two of you are just completely focused on this goal together and they see all your gifts. It's amazing. The key, though, when you're in that beautiful moment, is to keep your wits about you. Don't get so caught up in it that you're not also critically discerning the other things going on around you. Maybe a classical example of this, a more simple example, could be a heavy sales pitch, right? You go into a place and a person's chit-chatting with you and you're talking to them and they're saying, wow, like you're really cool, like you know a lot about this. But at the end of the day, they're trying to sell you something. I actually recently bought a car. You remember that car thing? I did actually finally do it. And because there was no haggling over the price, the salesperson was still trying to win me over. And I was able to kind of look at him with a twinkle in my eye and say, I'm buying the car, we're good. You know, no need to blow smoke anymore. So I think part of it is when we're getting that full court press, when that sort of heavy, wow, you're so amazing is happening, that we are able to keep our humility and our wits about us so we can pay attention to what else is going on in that moment. You're trying to sell me a car, what else are you trying to sell me at this moment? It's a little bit cynical what I'm suggesting, but you do need to sort of lift the hood and look at what's under it. What's really going on? I have worked with countless numbers of clients. When we do sort of the post-mortem, they're in the worst. I mean, the narcissistic abuse is through the roof, which is why they've attempted to set up an appointment and pay the money and all of that. But I do the post-mortem when we go back to the very beginning. And time again, what many people have told me is that they even thought this person wasn't perfect. And they were like, no, I wasn't even really attracted to them. But boy, were they into me. And it was the fact that that narcissist was originally so into them that almost blinded them. And in fact, they'll even admit it. They're like, they weren't even all that. But how into me they were is what turned my head. And then, because they were so into them, because in some ways it was addressing that childhood wound, wanting to be wanted, wanting to be seen, they would start excusing a lot of the behavior. A very common rookie mistake, and I have to say this is gendered. I've seen more young women make this mistake than young men. But a rookie mistake is when you're in a relatively new relationship and that person is so into you, but they're also a little jealous, curious about exes, wondering about other people noticing you. And they rationalize it as, I am just so into you, like, I can't even see straight. You're so amazing. The idea that these other people, like, I don't want someone else to snatch you away from me. This is beyond a red flag. Like, this is a red banner. These people who are so good at wanting people too much, it's part of love bombing, that it's easy for that to get sort of turned into, I'm so into you that I can't imagine sharing you, I can't imagine losing you, I can't imagine, I don't even know, we're not even comfortable with other people noticing you. It can feel seductive. A couple of years later, you realize it was the opening shot on somebody being really, really controlling. When somebody almost over-desires you, over-wants you, and almost seems like they want to entirely possess you, even though it can feel like a fantasy, it's often a sign of some other slightly more dangerous signs, like possessiveness, like relationship control. Like I said, it's often part of the love bombing phase that they're trying to win you over, but that over-desiring you in the love bombing phase will very quickly turn into control. Your vulnerability in this is when it's important for you to want to be wanted. Listen, I would love for people to sit in front of me and say, you're a genius and you're so smart and you know so much about narcissism. There's lots of other people who know a lot too. And it's important for me to know what I know. I respect what other people know. I thank goodness that all of us are out here trying to educate people to help them and keep them from more harm. But you got to catch yourself. Because if you don't catch yourself, that's when you can get lured by the charms of narcissistic people who may be trying to take your money, trying to take your heart, or trying to take your sanity. You have to go backwards and think about, what was it about my own story that makes it so powerful to want to be wanted? Think back to maybe it was those rare few opportunities in childhood when you were seen and you were heard. It can make you very vulnerable as an adult, almost starving for those experiences again. It's perfectly appropriate to want to be seen. In fact, it's healthy and everybody deserves it. The key is to notice if it's so overwhelming that you're not paying attention to the other things that might be happening in the early phases of a relationship. Whether it's somebody that's trying to snooker you into taking a job that's going to underpay you, but they're telling you you're all that, so you're willing to take the bad deal. Somebody who's trying to win you over in a relationship, and they tell you you've hung the moon and you're the most exquisite, celestial, beautiful creature they've ever seen. And so you stop noticing things like the control, the possessiveness, the jealousy, or the rage. Whatever it may be, when that person tries to draw you in, you've got to pay attention to your own vulnerabilities. For people out there who have that vulnerability, who so want that person to be so in their face, I love you, you're the most amazing thing in the world, and feel like that's important to them, it's often a sign that maybe seeking out therapy wouldn't be a bad idea, just to see where that wound comes from, where that want comes from. And then finding healthy ways to get it. Being in relationships where it's reciprocal. Someone sees that you're wonderful, you see that they're wonderful, but in a healthy way, you can keep the eyes in front and in back of your head aware to make sure that you're not getting lured in on an early wound, but rather because this person sees you accurately, isn't trying to control you, isn't trying to manipulate you, isn't trying to overpower you, but rather truly looks inside of you and sees your beauty inside and out, and sees your worth inside and out. But here's the thing. Ultimately, it has to start with you. If you're able to be self-possessed of your strengths, your wonder, your goodness, and also be self-possessed of the things you don't know, and be able to see yourself in a whole way, you're going to be less vulnerable to someone sweeping in and overwhelming you and filling in that hole of wanting to be so overwhelmingly desired. Many of the clients I've worked with who got into narcissistic relationships that were characterized by heavy levels of control. Where are you going? Who are you seeing? Who are you talking to? Whose picture you're liking? Who is that you were hitting up on Instagram? That ongoing control often start from this place of a person who desperately just wanted to be really wanted. And that narcissist swept in, overwhelmed them, really desired them. And then their signals got confused and they couldn't see how much of that overwhelming desire also coupled with control. So much of how we bring people into our lives is really about self-awareness. And self-awareness is not just about knowing our strengths and weaknesses, but also understanding our stories, understanding the things that bring us to this point in time. When we understand that, and we understand our vulnerabilities, because we've all got them, those proverbial Achilles heels, those are the places where people can get in and really take advantage of us. For some people, that deep primitive drive just to be seen, just to be desired, and to be wanted can be one of those vulnerabilities. And it's one of those places that when a narcissist gets in, can rather quickly turn into control, manipulation, and coercion. Pay attention. Many times learning our own vulnerabilities and blind spots are an important way to keep us protected, safe, and good gatekeepers so we don't let the narcissist in.
When I talk about forgiveness, and then we think about it in line with narcissistic abuse, and what happens to people in emotionally abusive relationships when we're talking about it in terms of forgiveness is a really fraught area and a difficult area. I've been very clear with all of you about it and my thinking. I do believe forgiveness is a very personal journey. And I also believe forgiveness is not required. I think you can heal from narcissistic abuse without forgiving. And I think this is especially important if you're going to have ongoing contact with the narcissist. Remember, for people with narcissistic personalities, they take forgiveness and they don't view it as a gift. They view it as permission to just keep behaving badly because they're like, I'm going to get away with it now. This other person's going to forgive me. They continue behaving in an egocentric manner. They keep doing, seeking out validation and being manipulative and doing all kinds of egocentric things and lacking empathy. And then they apologize later. And you forgive. Or if you're with a really malignant, toxic narcissist, they don't apologize. They will just blame you and somehow rationalize what they did, and then they'll just do it again in some different form. It can be soul destroying to keep forgiving someone, to have them, and then you forgive them and they keep repeating their transgressions. It truly is that proverbial seventh circle of hell. But I was recently witness to some stories that were actually told to me in my sort of my friendship life, and some experiences that reinforced for me one more time and highlighted why when you forgive narcissists too quickly, not only does it really demoralize you because you're continually abused from being in this narcissistic relationship despite forgiving them, but I see now it places you at risk for letting more narcissists into your life. So let's start by revisiting this idea of cognitive dissonance. I've talked about it many times. Cognitive dissonance is the idea that we cannot keep two contradictory ideas in our minds at the same time easily. We can, but it's not easy. So we often justify something that is wrong or doesn't fit so we can get comfortable. It all goes back to that original Aesop's fable. Remember the fox and the sour grapes, right? Cognitive dissonance is why people get stuck in narcissistic relationships. They justify the bad behavior of the narcissist over and over again so they can keep the relationship going. But it goes one step farther. People, not just survivors of narcissistic abuse, but people in general, they do not like to be disillusioned. They don't. Too many people out there want to believe family is good and we should be loyal to our families and love is great and married is great and being married is better than single and love can rescue everything and it's just loyal, good, great. We don't want those lifetime beliefs to be penetrated. And this is a big reason for why many people forgive. So they can maintain their illusion, and sometimes delusion, of a happy family, or a loving parent, or growing old with someone. And then for a minute, it may even be good, right? You forgive and things are good, and then boom, you're right back where you started. And the narcissist is toxic again. The rubber band goes back to its original size, and they start behaving badly again. Obviously, it is not good for you to be caught in the revolving door that is a narcissistic relationship. But it is also a problem. This sort of forgiving the narcissist thing is a problem for another reason. When you keep forgiving the toxic people in your midst, at some level, you have to keep yourself blind, right? You have to forget that you've already forgiven them in the past before, and they keep doing the same thing to you. They keep saying the same invalidating stuff. They keep gaslighting you. They keep lying. They keep doing whatever cruel thing it is that they do, right? You got to forget some of that and be blind to that, because really to keep forgiving under those circumstances, and then to make things even worse, by you being the forgiving, saintly martyr all the time, lots of people tell you how great you are. Oh, you're so strong. You're so forgiving. Why? Because your forgiveness lets them also keep up their little illusions and delusions of happy families and people can change. You get to keep that up because you're being such a nice forgiver. And because being viewed as a saintly person is kind of nice, but being viewed as that saintly person is only going to work if you stay blind, and you stay blind to their patterns and you keep forgiving them. That unseeingness, that not seeing the narcissist patterns, is dangerous in a world full of narcissists. Because when you keep forgiving and keep believing in change and believe it's all going to be okay when they say, I'm going to change, that unseengness, that unwilling to see, you also get blocked in seeing the new narcissists that come along. Okay? And these can be new friends or coworkers or extended family. And you can't see all these narcissists in your world because you're putting so much damned effort into forgiveness time that you don't get to develop the muscle, the much more uncomfortable muscle to develop that forces you to stop and say, like, this isn't cool the way this person's treating me, or I'm not going to spend any more time with this person. No, 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 no. By forgiving the narcissistic people around you repeatedly, you actually run the risk of becoming a world-class enabler. And once you leave that door open, it's like flies. More come in the door, right? And lots more narcissists will come in. I see this happen all the time. I've actually had people tell me I'm sort of mean or dismissive or unkind because I'm not giving people another chance, or I'm not being fair to the narcissist, or that I'm just a sort of an awful dark person for saying to walk away. I get that a lot. And inevitably, those messages are coming from the forgivers. These are the people who keep letting more and more and more toxic people in and make excuses for them as well. I'm sure some of those messages are also coming from the narcissist, but really from those people who don't want to see it. Listen, when two healthy people are involved in a relationship, the fact is none of us are perfect, none of us. And forgiveness is a divine and rich human experience. I believe in forgiveness when there's two healthy people involved. But when a narcissist is involved, forgiveness is simply going to perpetuate the abuse. So now, if you're able to go full on no contact with a narcissist from your world, and the narcissist can no longer get access to you, then perhaps you might be able to make forgiveness work for you because they're gone. They have ideally no more impact on your life except for the wounds you still carry. But if they are still in your life and you forgive, not only is that narcissistic person going to slip and continually keep doing what they do and hurting you, but you're just going to keep letting more narcissists in the door. I am always struck by how many people will tell me that they are on their third marriage to a narcissist, or they're with their fourth partner who is a narcissist, or who have multiple friends like this. And I wonder, are they part of this whole forgiveness brigade that is out there? Because otherwise, after this happens to you once, you'd like to think you'd never want it again. I'm not going to sit here and tell you whether or not you want to forgive. That is your personal decision. I can only tell you what the experience of forgiveness is going to look like with a narcissist. But I can also tell you that forgiveness will place you at risk, not only for ongoing harm from the narcissist already in your life, but for letting more and more people with these kinds of personalities in the door. And the more difficult people you are exposed to, the greater the toll will be on your mental and physical health. So keep in mind that you forgive narcissists all you want, but it carries risks, and even risks you didn't consider. Not just the ongoing shenanigans of the narcissist you know, but sadly, introducing a lot more narcissists in your life that you didn't know, and not being able to accurately identify the people already in your life who have difficult personalities. I consider it a win when somebody really does the deep dive on narcissistic abuse in their life. They're willing to identify it, set appropriate boundaries, and then they're like, holy cow, this is my sister. This is one of my close friends. This is my colleague. I always wondered why these relationships were exhausting. These are really painful reckonings when you open your eyes and you recognize that perhaps all that forgiving you were doing was letting a lot of people in your life get away with a lot of harm on yours. Well, I was recently doing an interview. I was being interviewed by a therapist, some of you may have heard of, named Terry Real. And in our conversation, he reminded me of something I had learned about long ago, the concept of empathic reversal, a concept that has been discussed in the family therapy and trauma literature. But this concept of empathic reversal actually has a lot of bearing on understanding what happens to you in a narcissistic relationship as well. So I think it's really important for us to talk about it on this channel. Empathic reversal sort of manifests as when a person who has had suffered trauma or even narcissistic abuse earlier in life, they will give a lot of empathy out to other people, but give themselves almost no empathy. So lots out, none to themselves, right? So what does that look like? People who are caught in empathic reversal will over empathize with other people, be over concerned with how other people are feeling, check in on whether other people are doing okay, they will tend to them, and they'll do this empathizing almost to a point of exhaustion, but show no empathy to themselves. Now, we know that narcissistic people operate as vampires, and instead of blood, they suck out empathy, right? And as a result, they are naturally drawn to empathic people because they can suck them dry, and the empathic person will rarely step away. Now, since for so many survivors of narcissistic abuse, it is a lifelong issue that started in childhood, let's start by talking about this from childhood. The child of a narcissistic parent doesn't have much of a choice but to attempt to forge some kind of alliance with their narcissistic parent, no matter how distorted this alliance may be, for no other reason than for the child to protect themselves and get their attachment needs met. The child then will disproportionately pay their empathy forward to the parent, try to be good, helpful, attentive to the parent, aware of the parent, pleasing the parent, and at the same time, be very unempathic to themselves. The child themselves wondering, what am I doing wrong? Maybe I'm not a good kid, blaming themselves. This sets that reversal precedent of lots of empathy out, but almost no empathy back into the self. Being empathic to yourself when you are in a narcissistic relationship, especially as a child, is almost incompatible to the empathy demands that these relationships have. Empathy isn't modeled for the child, and it's also not safe. It's unsafe for the child to be empathic to themselves. The parent will stop that. Then that child grows up, and the empathic reversals persist. The empathic reversal is always a problem because the person is always giving a disproportionate amount of their emotional bandwidth to other people. But if the empathically reversed good person encounters a good person, a kind person, then that good and kind person, then they might be more likely to have the experience of that good, kind person stepping in and offering some care and empathy back. Because left to their own devices, that empathically reversed person is only going to put the empathy out. But alas, those empathically reversed people out there often end up in the crosshairs of the narcissist. People who have this tendency towards empathic reversal, they give, and the narcissist takes and takes. And because healing only happens when a person is kind to themselves, this model of empathic reversal all but guarantees that healing will be slowed and blocked, since a person is giving all of their empathy away and have none for themselves, which is essential for healing. The destruction that is part of the narcissistic relationship is observed in their willingness to take all the empathy being offered and not only not offer any back, but the people they most often prey on will not only not have empathy for themselves, but the narcissistic person won't encourage them to have empathy for themselves. People who have this empathic reversal will find it uncomfortable to have empathy for themselves. They won't feel comfortable setting boundaries or saying no. They will sacrifice what they need for the other person because it literally feels more natural. So the work for the person who is prone to empathic reversal is to start slowly getting comfortable with flipping the paradigm and tolerating what it is like to address their own needs. The concept of the empathic reversal helps us understand the empath narcissist dynamic so much better. It's not as simple as the narcissist having some sort of homing device that allows them to prey on empaths, but rather it is the narcissist's willingness to play on this empathic reversal mechanism. The narcissist's needs get met, and the other person expects nothing and gives themselves nothing, and the narcissist loves that, right? So pay attention to this dynamic. Think about whether you find it naturally easier to give to others. And if you actually might even feel safer when you're the one putting the empathy out rather than having to be empathic to yourself. Because if that is easier, it also stands to reason that you may simply get more naturally pulled into narcissistic relationships. So while this empathic reversal is a natural extension of what happens when you have early life trauma or narcissistic relationships, it's so crucial to address it. We tend to glorify the people out there who are all give and no take, but that's actually a really bad precedent because it's a setup for being preyed on by narcissists. All healthy things are about balance, and how you hand out empathy, that needs to be about balance too. Lots of us see ourselves as loyal. It's a virtuous state, a healthy state. I would argue it's something we value in people as a quality more than almost any other quality. We value loyalty. Now, of course, just because someone says that they are loyal doesn't mean that they are. Some people who claim to be loyal are anything but, and will proclaim and sell folks on their loyalty while simultaneously stabbing people in the back pretty regularly. Narcissistic people in particular love to consider themselves as loyal, virtuous, morally upright. Hell, they even think of themselves as empathic, right? So that's how much distortion and almost this sort of strange delusionality there can be with this personality style. But this video isn't about them. We already know that in general, narcissistic people are disloyal. But what does loyalty mean to you? For most of us, it's about honoring our word, standing by people we care about, especially at a difficult time, standing up for something or someone we believe in, following through, sticking to a moral code, keeping promises. All stuff we would agree is loyalty. And generally, these are our behaviors, right? The way we show up relates to loyalty. But what about thoughts? Can thoughts be disloyal? I'll give you a simple example. Anyone in a relationship might have experienced this. Simple example might be noticing someone attractive and wondering what it might be like to have a physical dalliance with them, and you're in a relationship with someone else. You don't do it. You don't even communicate about it. You just fantasize about it. Is that disloyal? So that takes us to where a lot of survivors of narcissistic abuse get stuck, which is the thought that if you think someone who is close to you, someone you're supposed to care about or love, a parent, a spouse, or a partner, an adult child, a really dear friend, if you have the thought that they're narcissistic or that they're abusive or that they're never going to change or that they're always going to be a toxic person, is that disloyal? I'm struck by the number of people who believe a thought with no action, a thought can be disloyal. And that right there becomes a real stumbling block to healing. What happens is that folks, maybe even you, may stumble onto a YouTube channel like this, or to an Instagram page, or to a book and think, yikes, I'm reading this, I'm listening to this, I'm watching this, oh, dear old dad, or my wife, or my son, whoever it is, they may be narcissistic. There are all these things, they're awful in their behavior, they're doing all the stuff this person's talking about. Every so often the relationship's okay, but generally they say and do things that have consistently hurt me, and it keeps happening, and nothing I've ever done or said works with them. So you have that thought. Maybe they're narcissistic, and then people will think, oh, no, I'm the bad one. I am a piece of for thinking that. How can I have so little faith in someone I'm supposed to love? Maybe I'm the bad-hearted one. Maybe I'm the narcissist. Maybe I'm the rotten person. Now, this is especially bad when you're having these thoughts about family of origin, a parent or a sibling. You're told you're supposed to love them. And when you think this bad thought, a lot of people will feel guilty. And they'll either pivot and blame themselves for being so bad as to think my mom's narcissistic, or they go back into denial or pull out a million justifications like, oh, they can't be narcissistic. They sent me a text on my birthday, that sort of thing. Now, I get it. I understand how people can go there, and this is not easy. I thought about this a lot during the holidays when I do know quite a few narcissistic folks, and I had some decent moments with some of the narcissistic folks in my life, and I tried to receive it as a sunny day, to be my best self with them. But then when it went south again, and it always did, I knew I was right, that they are narcissistic, but it didn't mean I have to be fists up all the time. The radical acceptance is a way to allow us to remain serene enough in the face of their narcissism coming up again. But I also double down on being my best Ramani, the best I could, with no expectations of reciprocity or that they would do right, even if I did right. I didn't have to lose myself. But I also did have moments where I did wonder, maybe I'm the bitch. Those moments would typically fade pretty fast when their behavior proved me wrong, and they would do something narcissistic again. But even then, I'd have that moment of like, maybe you're getting lost in all your narcissism stuff, Ramani. I personally, and as a shrink, don't believe that thoughts are disloyal. I think thoughts are a place where we can process stuff, create working models to help us make sense of the world. We can try out a thought, and it may then connect to a feeling. By framing the narcissistic people in our lives, by framing their toxic behavior as unacceptable, and recognizing, sadly, that it is part of a personality, that is who they are, and isn't going to change, it may bring up grief, but it also allows us to maintain realistic expectations. Then we can dig deeper into our authentic selves despite being in the presence of behavior that is not good for us. We can show up as a good version of ourselves for ourselves and not because we think it will change them. It's a process, but this loyalty barrier can really block people from getting to radical acceptance and then subsequently healing. It's okay to have the thought that a parent's behavior disgusts you, or that a sibling is horrifying to listen to, or that you wish you never had to spend another minute with a narcissistic family member,